Okay, thank you. Okay. Thank you, everybody, for coming tonight, and thank you, Greg, for organizing the event, and also for assembling this really great panel of speakers. I think we've heard a lot of different perspectives tonight. What I'm going to share with you tonight is slightly different. It's to do with breaking a story that's broke recently that I think really encapsulates where we're at right now as a society in the West. So we're all familiar with the term imperialism, but this term has morphed a little bit. We're not at war in the same way that we have been in the past. We're talking about the Cold War, and I'll share a few things with you. But there's something called soft power. I think everybody understands that. And I'm going to share a little aspect of that I think is really important. We're seeing it every day in the press, in the media. We're seeing soft power in action. And the argument I'm going to make for you today is that normally this is a weapon that's pointed at other countries by powers like the United States. Some might argue that it's the preeminent empire of the day. Some might say it's the Anglo-American empire. Some might say it's the U.S.-led world order, post-World War II world order, that's the dominant imperial power right now in the world. But this weapon's being pointed back at us in the West. And I think a lot of people are becoming aware of this now, that this weapon that's been perfected overseas is now being used against our own population by our corporate media, by our government, or what I call the government media complex. I'm going to share with you how that's being done right now. So a really important story broke, and I don't know if everybody here is familiar with the Integrity Initiative. Raise your hand if you've heard of this. Okay, a few people have heard of this. This is a story that broke in November. Some documents were leaked online, and they told the story of a think tank and an initiative or a program that's being funded via the Foreign Office, but also this Institute of Statecraft is the think tank that spawned this Integrity Initiative. What is it? I'm going to explain to you what it is. So, and mind you, this has a war chest of something around 100 million pounds for the next 5 years, just to deal with what they call the Eastern Neighborhood. This is where Europe presses against Russia, for all intents and purposes. So the funding for the Integrity Initiative is coming from a grant from the Foreign Office, but the funding for the Institute of Statecraft is coming from a few different places. I'll show you. But this is to support civil society programs. This is straight from their opening white paper, which you can access, and a lot of people have reported on it. But this is to programs seeking to rebuild the ability for democratic societies to resist large-scale malicious disinformation and influence campaigns. You know who they're talking about there. So this is the Russians, right? So, and this is important, this term rebuild. They need to rebuild the capacity to resist these influence campaigns. This sounds really familiar, doesn't it? I'm sure if you're from an older generation, you know what I'm talking about. This is straight out of the Cold War. So what we're going to show you here is the Cold War never really finished. Maybe it finished for the Soviet Union, but it's been really ramped up in the West since what Ray was referring to, the falling of the Berlin Wall. So this is an incredible story because this is a clandestine operation that involves bureaucrats, civil servants, mainstream media journalists, military information warfare departments, and many other cells with clusters in different countries all working together for one common purpose, okay? And this was all being done more or less in secret or sort of off the radar until this leak happened in November. And I'm talking about journalists from The Guardian, from The Times, from the New York Times, from people who write for the Washington Post, people from broadcast television in Europe, in the United States, in the UK. So there were cells and clusters of journalists in every country. Okay, this is going on under the surface. So you see stories in the mainstream media which are blatantly fake, planted stories about things that Putin's did, or that Russia's going to do, or Russia's going to cut off our internet access, or there's a whole slew of these stories. So this is amazing. So now many of us who've studied the media have suspected something like this is going on. It seems so coordinated, but we didn't really understand the structure or the architecture of it until this leak. Now we know. It's validated what a lot of people suspected, but couldn't really articulate for sure. Okay, and by the way, this is public funded. Initially, it was privately funded, and it's publicly funded. They're getting money from the U.S., they're getting money from foundations, they're also getting money directly from our governments to do this. United States Department of State, NATO involved, some cryptic foundations like the Smith-Richardson Foundation, and Facebook and social media platforms are also involved in this, okay? And this is the sort of output that you're getting. This was a daily occurrence. How many times did you see in the last 18 months? Jeremy Corbyn went from being a Al-Qaeda sympathizer to an IRA terrorist to a Kremlin agent, and then now for the last 6 months he's been the country's leading anti-Semite, according to all of these mainstream media publications. Where is this coming from? A lot of people suspected that this was being coordinated centrally. And I think we found some answers to this with the Integrity Initiative. I'm not saying that that's the only source of this particular case. But this is just one case of many. Here's a fake story that was planted in The Guardian before Christmas, that somehow Paul Manafort, Donald Trump's campaign manager, was visiting Julian Assange at the Ecuadorian embassy in London, and they were plotting Russiagate effectively. Okay, there's no fact or nothing in this story that's really true. This is a blatantly fake story. This is, if I wanted to show you all of these bogus stories, I have a file of them, and it's well over 100 now, between all of the mainstream media outlets. Absolutely fabricated stories on almost a daily basis. It's slowed down recently in the last month. Some of you might have noticed that. But they're still pumping them out. The Express, the Mail, the Guardian, there's some on the BBC, CNN, of course, in America, are sort of leading that sort of campaign. And it's not only, so they're smearing Julian Assange, Jeremy Corbyn, people like this, on this side of the Atlantic. But this same type of effort is going on smearing politicians like Tulsi Gabbard right now, who they've accused of the Russians are boosting her on social media. This was the accusations that came out. This was an NBC story. So they're demonizing clearly what, if you look at the policies that these politicians represent, Jeremy Corbyn, it's a transformational foreign policy. It's a big break, what he's advocating. And I'm not advocating for any political party, Labor, Conservative, or whatever. I'm talking about the policy. Big change in foreign policy, also supporting Palestine. This is completely unusual for the last how many years with our governments on both sides of the Atlantic. So clearly Jeremy Corbyn is a big threat to anybody who opposes that. Okay, and Tulsi Gabbard likewise is talking about stopping endless wars. This is more or less the same thing most U.S. presidents have run on, but she's particularly got more of an, she's managed to articulate it a lot clearer than past presidential candidates. And so she's getting attacked mercilessly. Is this coming from an Integrity Initiative type effort on the U.S. side? I don't know for sure, but I'm just looking at the results. Why are they demonizing this person? Clearly, they're a threat to the current order. Okay. So the media has a lot to blame, and we're meant to think, we're told constantly, this is the #1 threat. they somehow think that when they're talking about Russian influence or disinformation campaigns or Russian propaganda, most of the time they're referring to RT, and even in the U.S. National Intelligence, the head of national intelligence, this was the sort of focus of the report a couple years ago, was this network, RT. I'm just as an example. And we're meant to think that that somehow trumps and can punch above and beyond the weight of all of these. Collectively, we're talking about a multi-billion-dollar corporate media complex. That somehow RT, as an example, is poisoning the brains of people in the West. When in fact, if you look at the headlines on RT.com, it's the same as what you see on a lot of alternative media outlets. And they've spun this to say that all bloggers, and they're under the influence of the Kremlin. They even printed blacklists and circulated them online. An organization called Proper Not did this in November 2016, said that 200 independent blogs and websites were part of a Kremlin or Russian disinformation and propaganda network. Most of them were from America and been blogging long before Russia was deemed enemy #1 in the West. So this is what we're dealing with. So all of these brands I'm showing you here put out fake news on a daily basis. Okay, and especially the top two, CNN and BuzzFeed, pushed the Steele dossier out right at the beginning of Donald Trump's administration. It's a totally fabricated dossier, but they pushed it out. And they're spinning side stories off this constantly. So, and we're meant to think that this isn't happening. It's what we need to be worried about is the Russians. It's quite unbelievable. But there's a method to their madness, and I'll show you. And one of the think tanks that's really driving this, that's kind of a central hub of this, and not only this, but also is targeting Syria as well, is the Atlantic Council. And the Atlantic Council gets its funding from a number of interesting sources, including the Gulf, the military-industrial complex. I'm talking about major defense contractors. I'm talking about NATO. A lot of interesting foundations and trusts and things like that. And they have a thing called the Digital Forensic Lab. So this is the brains, the data crunching brains of the Atlantic Council. They're advising Facebook, Twitter, governments, running to these people looking for data on Russian influence and spotting Russian bots online. They're even labeling people, real people I know, calling them Russian bots. And demonizing them, defaming people, running defamation campaigns, smearing people. This is what they're doing. And so there's some public money going into this. So technically, we're paying for organizations to run smear campaigns against people who are simply citizens acting on their own volition, not under the orders of the Kremlin, but on their own volition because they don't agree with the war agenda, because they're passionate about an anti-war position, and they've been consistent about that for decades. These same people, and some of them are here today, okay, and you know many others, okay. So, but this is the hub. This is the new technical hub, the data processing, and this is interesting. So they have an alert system. So everybody in the Integrity Initiative clusters, if you're in Spain, for instance, and there's someone who's up for a cabinet appointment, I'm talking about the Homeland Security in Spain appointment this last summer, Pedro Baños, was sympathetic to Russia. That alert went out to the Integrity Cluster to start tweeting and harassing mainstream media in Spain, and they demonized this person, and his appointment was withdrawn within 48 hours of this. This is a machine, and it's very efficient, okay? And if anybody has seen, there was a documentary series, and this reminded me of something, and I couldn't put my finger on it. And then I realized this very much mirrors, in the United States, how the Israeli lobby works, okay? And lo and behold, you'll find some of the exact same people involved in that operation as with the Integrity Initiative. So there's overlap. But not only that, it's the method. This is kind of a high-tech weapon, a fifth column, if you will. And so if you've seen this, Al Jazeera released this documentary, the one about the USA lobby, the Israeli lobby in the US, that got spiked by Al Jazeera under pressure from the US government and the Israeli lobby. The British one did air, and they're both excellent. You can watch them both online. And they're tremendously revealing as to the methods and the efficiency that this is a military operation. So a Palestinian activist running for student body president at UC Berkeley or some major university, as soon as that goes on social media, an alert goes out to the Israeli lobby clusters, the activists, and with it, then they start flooding the comment sections on social media. And pretty soon it's a controversy. Rumors are spread. She's an Islamist. She's this. She's an anti-Semite, and so forth. And so this is a machine. It works exactly the same way, pretty much as the Integrity Initiative. And one of the directors of the Integrity Initiative used to be with BICOM. And BICOM, if you don't know, it's the British Israeli Communications Research Center. And they do a lot of lobbying and pressuring and funding of political candidates in the UK. But we have the exact same thing in the United States with IPAC and a number of what you might call right-wing or Israeli-friendly think tanks. There's many of them, and there's a lot of money available for this effort. So it really is happening on both sides of the Atlantic. So, but back to this original rebuild. We need to rebuild our ability to withstand disinformation, attacks on our society. And I thought, this is interesting. Where does this come from? What are they talking about? Rebuilding. It means that there was something built before. And one of the things that I think they're referring to is the Information Research Department. This was a Cold War department, planting fake stories. They had a number of journalists on the books. This was to, it was to demonize the Communist Party or socialists, or also just very subtle defamation campaigns of journalists who were leaning left, okay? We had the same thing in America, and this department worked together with what the CIA set up, okay? That was a Cold War relic that was wound up. In fact, they've just declassified a whole tranche of documents which you can look at in the National Archives this week, actually, and the BBC reported on it a couple of days ago. One of the more useful things the BBC has done in the last few weeks, so that's good. But George Orwell is somebody who you might be familiar with. He was involved with this agency, and many, many other people went through this. So this was a very real thing. So what do we have here? They've essentially just rebooted. They're trying to reboot the Cold War, but now it's privatized. Now it's done through the third sector, NGOs, trusts, but with more open collusion with the corporate media. And you can get a lot of these things through freedom of information. Some you can't. We've tried. So it's in a way, it's also a gravy train. I look at this as a jobs program. Cyber warfare, defend against this information attacks, influence campaigns. If you're running a research grant at a university and it's fighting fake news or dealing with Russian disinformation, there's a good chance you're going to get a grant, either from the DOD or in America, from the Department of Defense or the MOD here. You will get funding for these things. They're sort of hot right now. There's a big story in Cambridge University, a big controversy about this, where Cambridge refused a grant because they were afraid of how it was going to reflect on the institution. Okay, but in America, this ship sailed a long time ago. The CIA have colonized, and Homeland Security and the NSA have colonized our university systems. So this is what we're producing, the next generation of information warriors. To fight what? To fight this. So we've accelerated the Cold War, even though the Soviet Union's gone. So they've fashioned an enemy out of China or out of Russia or Venezuela. Who knows? They might reboot Cuba pretty soon and lift them up as the enemy du jour. So we're told, and this is part of my final thought, we're told that there's a threat to our democracy, that we're under the threat of state-sponsored propaganda, that there's planting fake news. We have to be worried about this. that there's troll armies on social media deployed by the Kremlin to screw with our minds and sow chaos and make us doubt our great democratic institutions. This is what we're told on a daily basis now. We're told that there's meddling in Western democracy. We're told there's large-scale malicious disinformation and influence campaigns. We're told there's clandestine media networks working together with foreign governments and military, the GRU. We're told there's organized smear campaigns against our independent Western values and democratic values. And so what's the reaction? There's a purge, deleting social media accounts during elections even. In the United States, they deleted and purged hundreds or thousands of accounts before the midterm elections. Russia didn't do that. The United States did that in collusion with Silicon Valley firms. That's unbelievable. And that's right in front of our face. So the government is colluding with corporations to censor, harass, smear, shut down public and political dissent. That's happening as we speak. And the people responsible for that are some of the organizations I showed you earlier. There's no debate about this. This is on record. This is already proven. Just because it's not getting a spotlight from the mainstream media doesn't mean it's not happening or it's not important. It is important. So we're told that Russia's doing all this. That's the thing to worry about. Everything in that bullet point list there is being done by these two parties right now, not Russia. So what's being done to us in terms of disinformation, planting fake news, propaganda, meddling in Western democracies? I gave you an example with the Spanish cabinet appointment, direct meddling in the EU member states' democracy. We're doing that. That's happening on this side of the virtual Iron Curtain. It's not coming from Russia. So this is a tremendous inversion of reality. And one thing, the last thing I'm going to leave you with is, we talk about imperialism, and if you think about the post-World War II, the US-led post-World War II liberal world order, okay? All of our structures, whether it's government, whether they're multilateral structures, the EU, the UN, the World Trade Organization, NATO, probably the EU and NATO are the two best examples. These are as a result of World War II. Our whole society is structured based on wars in the past, the reactions to those wars. And so now this is the history, we're so far, it's so far in a rearview mirror now. It's been a while since the last big war in Europe or in the West, okay, or World War, okay. So there's a crisis going on with the current order. They're losing their frame of reference. They can't create an enemy. They can't bait Russia. They can't bait China. So now they've created a phantom menace, trying to recreate a virtual Cold War. And it's very profitable. And we are, at the end of the day, we're being colonized at home by this. We're being recolonized. There's nothing left to colonize, so now it's Western society that they're going to colonize and squeeze as much capital and political capital out of this as possible. So that's what's happening now as we speak, okay? So it's a tremendous injustice in many ways, but the worst part is the last person I'm going to blame is the media, because government's going to do what government always does. How many people trust politicians to tell the truth all the time, even the good ones, okay? Not a lot of hands going up. Government's going to do what it's going to do. It's up to the fourth estate, the free press, to hold power to account. But what happens when the fourth estate becomes a fifth column working against the interests of the people? Where is your democracy then? Where is it? It's lost. And we're heading into this impasse right now. It's very real. And I think without a fourth estate, Julian Assange, WikiLeaks, represents, in my opinion, the purest form of a media outlet, where they get information, vet it, and publish it. Very little commentary. So, and they have a 10-year record, perfect record. And they're being vilified to no end by the establishment. They've even got the left against WikiLeaks. It's an amazing feat. So what happens, that's why Julian Assange and Chelsea Manning represent the right to publish, the right for a source to have some legal or constitutional protections to come forward as a whistleblower. These are so important. These are fundamental. These are two of the most important stories right now. And the press should have skin in the game, because if they are really part of the Fourth Estate, they should want to do something about this, because their survival or their viability as a press organization, as part of a Fourth Estate and a functioning democracy, that's at stake. So where's the outrage? Where's the pushback? I don't see any, and this worries me a lot. And so I'm putting that challenge out to everybody who works in media. You have to take this issue and devote some time to it, dedicate some time to it, because it's a fundamental pillar of Western, modern Western democratic nation states. It's having a free press, and it's functional, having whistleblowers that can come forward. You lose those, you lose, I dare say you lose everything. So that's my message tonight, and I just want to thank everybody for coming. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Sir Patrick. Wonderful speech. And for our next guest,